What if I told you that the imminent collapse of the global economy wasn't prevented by a fleet of American warships, but by a single encrypted phone call? Just hours ago, a secret transmission took place between two of the most powerful men on Earth, Mohammed bin Salman and Xi Jinping. They didn't meet to discuss peace treaties or routine diplomacy. Operating entirely in the shadows, they bypassed Washington to issue a ruthless, joint ultimatum regarding a 21-mile stretch of dark water, the Strait of Hormuz. If this narrow artery closes for even a few days, the industrial supply chains of every nation will seize, and the cost of your daily survival will skyrocket overnight. This wasn't just a geopolitical negotiation. It was the birth of a terrifying new world order, stepping into the vacuum of unipolar power, wielding economic leverage as a weapon of mass compliance. The trigger has already been pulled, and a financial shockwave is currently detonating across the globe. By the time this video ends, you will realize exactly why the reality you woke up to this morning has already ceased to exist. Something just happened that the world's most powerful governments desperately wanted to keep hidden from you. It was arranged in total secrecy, executed with surgical precision, and right now, it is detonating across the global order like a silent shockwave. You might not feel the tremors just yet, but the ground beneath your feet is already fracturing. By the time the full weight of this event finally washes up on the shores of public awareness, the reality you comfortably navigated yesterday will have completely vanished. Let's think about this logically for a second. We are so used to seeing world leaders smiling for the cameras, shaking hands, and signing hollow treaties that take decades to actually mean anything. But true power doesn't waste time on photo ops. True power moves in the dark. At the dead center of this incoming earthquake is a single, highly classified phone call. On one end of the line, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. On the other, Xi Jinping, the President of China. What passed between them wasn't some polite, routine diplomatic memo drafted by tired bureaucrats. It was an ultimatum. A joint, ruthless demand backed by a terrifying scale of economic leverage that the modern world has rarely seen deployed so directly. They aren't just playing geopolitical chess. They are holding the absolute lifeblood of the global economy in their hands. We are not talking about abstract textbook politics here. This is about the price of the food on your dinner table, the fuel in your car, and the survival of every major industry on Earth. Two men just bypassed the entire Western-led system to dictate the fate of the global economy. And the most chilling part? They did it because they knew absolutely no one could stop them. To understand why two of the most powerful men on Earth felt compelled to bypass every normal channel of diplomacy, you have to look at a tiny, dark sliver of water on the map. I want you to picture the Strait of Hormuz. People casually refer to it as a maritime chokepoint, but honestly, that word is far too polite. It is the absolute exposed jugular vein of the global economy. At its narrowest point, this strait is barely 21 miles wide, roughly 34 kilometers. Think about that. You could drive that distance on a highway in under 30 minutes. Yet, through this incredibly fragile, claustrophobic gap between the Omani coast and the Iranian shore, the modern world literally draws its breath. Every single day, a staggering 17 to 21 million barrels of crude oil are forced through that bottleneck. We are looking at a full 20% of all the globally traded oil on the planet. This is the industrial foundation of the earth. Saudi oil, Emirati oil, Kuwaiti oil, and critical shipments of Qatari liquefied natural gas that keep entire continents powered and heated. Now here is where the geopolitical logic gets genuinely terrifying. You would naturally assume that a system this vital to human survival has a backup plan, right? We have brilliant engineers and trillions of dollars in global infrastructure. But that is the grand illusion. The terrifying paradox is that there is absolutely no viable alternative. Analysts love to point to the East-West pipeline across Saudi Arabia or the Abu Dhabi crude line as safety nets. Let me be brutally honest with you. Those are a joke compared to the sheer volume Hormuz handles. They are a garden hose trying to do the job of a tsunami. A closure of this strait is not just a logistical hiccup or a bad day on the stock market. It is the ultimate financial doomsday scenario. If that passage is blocked, even partially, even for a mere handful of days, oil prices wouldn't just rise. They would violently shatter every existing economic model we have. The market panic would be instantaneous. Within weeks, the complex industrial supply chains of the wealthiest Western superpowers would completely seize up. And the real tragedy? It's the developing nations that would burn first, as the cost of simply transporting basic food and medicine spirals completely out of reach. This 21-mile gap isn't just water, it is a weapon of mass economic destruction, and it is the exact leverage point that just forced an unprecedented alliance in the shadows. But how did a deteriorating but manageable situation suddenly turn into an acute, red alert crisis? The answer lies in the murky waters of proxy warfare. Recent maritime operations by Iranian-linked actors and Houthi forces didn't just disrupt routine shipping. They crossed an invisible, highly sensitive red line that both Riyadh and Beijing had quietly drawn. They turned the strait from a chaotic political theater into an active, unpredictable hazard zone. When insurance rates spike to the point where moving a tanker becomes economically suicidal, the panic stops being a theoretical exercise. It becomes deeply, painfully personal for the two men sitting at the very apex of global power. To truly grasp the gravity of this moment, you have to look through the eyes of Mohammed bin Salman. On the surface, he projects absolute, unquestioned authority. But beneath that armor lies a glaring Achilles heel: his legacy. MBS's entire life work, his justification for power, is Vision 2030. It's a multi-trillion-dollar, generation-defining gamble to transform the Saudi desert into a futuristic utopia and pivot the kingdom away from its oil dependency. But here is the brutal, inescapable irony. To fund a future without oil, he desperately needs the uninterrupted, massive flow of oil revenue right now. A prolonged blockage of Hormuz wouldn't just dent his quarterly profits. It would shatter the fragile investor confidence that holds his entire architectural dream together. If the global market realizes that the Crown Prince cannot even guarantee the security of his own economic jugular, the illusion of his invincibility crumbles. A king who cannot protect his vault is a king waiting to fall. Now shift your perspective to Beijing. For Xi Jinping, the math is just as terrifying, though it arrives from the opposite direction. China is the undisputed roaring engine of global manufacturing, and it is endlessly thirsty. It is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and Saudi Arabia sits at the top of its supplier list. For 20 long years, Beijing has patiently played the long game, quietly pouring billions into the Gulf, building ports, laying pipelines, and cementing the Belt and Road Initiative. But all of that strategic patience, all of those decades of careful geopolitical positioning, instantly become a worthless pile of concrete and debt if the energy cannot actually reach Chinese shores. For Xi, a steady supply of Gulf energy isn't just about economic growth. It is the fundamental bedrock of social stability and the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy. This is the brilliant, terrifying logic behind their secret communication. Both men realized they were staring down the barrel of the exact same gun, and neither could neutralize the threat alone without sparking a catastrophic regional war. But together, that changes the math entirely. It is the ultimate unbreakable symbiosis, the absolute largest buyer locking hands with the absolute largest seller. When they issue a joint ultimatum, it ceases to be diplomacy. It becomes a force of gravity that the rest of the world has no choice but to obey. When you read the word immediate in their joint demand to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, you need to understand that this is not political theater. It is not an empty diplomatic threat. For decades, the ultimate warning in the Middle East was the looming shadow of the American Seventh Fleet. But what Mohammed bin Salman and Xi Jinping just deployed is actually far more terrifying than a carrier strike group. They didn't threaten with missiles. They deployed absolute, inescapable economic leverage. Think about the invisible trap they've just sprung. On one side, you have Saudi Arabia, a kingdom that holds the financial arteries of the entire region in its grip. On the other side, you have China, holding the keys to massive infrastructure investments, vital technology, and veto power at the UN Security Council. Together, they represent a pressure package that no military defense system can intercept. And this brings us to the most brilliant, ruthless twist in this entire saga. Let's look closely at Tehran. How has the Iranian regime managed to survive the most crushing, suffocating Western sanctions in modern history? They survived for one reason and one reason only: China. Beijing has been buying their sanctioned oil through back channels, keeping their fragile economy on life support while shielding them on the global diplomatic stage. Now imagine the absolute shock running through the highest levels of power in Iran right now. Their ultimate economic savior, their only remaining lifeline, just publicly locked arms with Saudi Arabia, Iran's bitterest, most deeply entrenched regional rival. And together they are pointing directly at Tehran and its proxies. The implicit message from Beijing is cold, calibrated, and crystal clear. Our friendship has limits. Do not touch our energy supply. This is a masterstroke of geopolitical checkmate. For the first time, the hardliners in Iran aren't facing down an American gun, a threat they've historically used to rally domestic support. Instead, they are staring into an empty Eastern wallet. They are completely cornered. The Iranian elite now face a brutal, existential choice. They can either quietly rein in the disruptions, or they can defy the order and watch Beijing sever the one and only financial umbilical cord keeping their regime from total collapse. But if you want to understand where the real pain of this crisis is being felt, you have to look away from the Middle East. You have to look inside the quiet, panicked rooms of Washington. For decades, the United States has held a singular, unquestioned role on the global stage. It was the sole guarantor of the world's security architecture. If a critical waterway was threatened, it was American power that stepped in to keep the arteries of global trade pumping. The world operated under an American umbrella, but this joint ultimatum from Riyadh and Beijing just shattered that illusion of unipolar dominance. MBS and Xi Jinping didn't just bypass the United States. They placed Washington in an agonizing, inescapable trap. Let's break down the chessboard from the American perspective, because right now they are facing a brutal, unwinnable scenario. Think about their options. Option 1. Washington publicly endorses the Saudi-Chinese demand. If they do that, the United States, the world's reigning superpower, is suddenly reduced to a mere follower, essentially cheering from the sidelines, while its biggest strategic rival and its oldest Middle Eastern ally dictate the terms of global security. Option 2, Washington opposes the demand. This is strategically incoherent and politically suicidal. How can the self-proclaimed defender of the free market stand up and say they oppose keeping the world's most vital energy choke point open? It would make them look like the villain actively trying to crash the global economy. So they are left with option 3, deafening silence. And in geopolitics, silence is the heaviest sound of all. By saying nothing, by letting MBS and Xi shape this massive crisis entirely on their own terms, Washington is forced into a bitter public confession. It is an admission that the reach of American influence in the Gulf has hard, visible limits, and that they are no longer the only ones capable of moving the needle. What we are witnessing right now is not just a diplomatic push to reopen a 21-mile strait. That is merely the surface level. What happened in that phone call was a massive tectonic shift. It was the absolute, undeniable coronation of a multipolar world, happening right in front of our eyes, leaving the old empire standing helplessly on the sidelines. Let's step away from the grand geopolitical chessboard for a moment. Strip away the encrypted phone calls, the supercarriers, the complex proxy wars, and the multi-billion-dollar trade deals. Because the brutal, naked truth of this entire crisis is this: all of these high-level, shadowy calculations eventually land squarely on your dinner table. When that 21-mile stretch of dark water chokes, the resulting surge in crude oil isn't just a flashing red percentage on a Wall Street terminal. It translates instantly into the physical world. It is the terrifying price you pay at the gas pump tomorrow morning. It is the skyrocketing cost of the diesel required to transport the wheat in your bread, the heating in your home, and the basic survival necessities for billions of people across developing nations who are already living on the edge. There is a profound, almost uncomfortable irony in what just happened. Let's be completely honest. Mohammed bin Salman and Xi Jinping did not make that unprecedented joint demand out of a sense of global charity. They acted purely out of cold, hard self-interest to protect their own regimes, their massive investments, and their historical legacies. Yet in doing so, their deeply selfish maneuver is exactly what is pulling the global economy back from the brink of a catastrophic inflationary collapse. The comfortable world where an American naval fleet was the sole, unquestioned guardian of global stability is dead. It didn't end with a massive, fiery military confrontation. It ended quietly, replaced by the sheer gravity of Eastern economic leverage. A new multipolar order has just been born in the shadows. The chess pieces have been moved, the ultimate leverage has been applied, and the strait will inevitably open. But make no mistake, starting tomorrow morning, the rules of the global game have been permanently rewritten. The world you understood yesterday is gone. The only question left is, are we actually ready for the one that just took its place?